Before I tell you this story, give me 1 second. If you have ever been called selfish by the very people you were quietly saving, hit subscribe right now. Because in the next few minutes, you are going to watch a woman set down 15 years of silence on a folding table, next to a birthday cake. My father looked at me across a plate of pot roast and said 6 words that ended everything. You have never given us anything. He said it in front of my mother, in front of my brother, in front of the sister I had raised more than he ever did. He didn't know about the envelope in my nightstand. He didn't know about the account that had been quietly bleeding out of my paycheck for 5 straight years. He didn't know that in 28 days, every single thing he thought was handled was about to come due at once. He was about to find out. My name is Maren Voss. I'm 36 years old. I worked nights in the ICU at Millbrook General. And for half a decade, I was the reason my family's house didn't fall down around them. They just never knew it was me holding it up. This is the story of the night I finally let go. Stay with me. Because the quiet ones, we don't yell when we're done. We just stop catching you. People think nurses are made of patience. That's not quite it. We're made of calm. There's a difference. Patience waits for things to get better. Calm just keeps functioning while everything falls apart around it. I learned that skill on a hospital floor, where a shaking voice can turn a manageable emergency into a catastrophe. And somewhere along the way, I brought that same skill home. I just didn't realize home was where it would cost me the most. I live alone, 20 minutes from the house I grew up in. Small apartment. Good light. A closet that stayed a little too organized, because order was the one thing in my life I could still control. Most weeks looked the same. A 12-hour shift. 4 hours of sleep, if I was lucky. Then I'd drive to my parents' house before anyone else woke up, to quietly fix whatever had broken. A leaking faucet. An overdue notice nobody wanted to open. My mother's blood pressure medication, refilled without a word. I told myself I didn't mind. Being needed felt like being loved, and for a long time, I genuinely couldn't tell those two things apart. That confusion is where this whole story starts. My father, Walter, spent 30 years building things with his hands. Additions, decks, half a subdivision on the edge of town. He was proud of his work, and prouder still of being the man who provided. That pride was the load-bearing wall of his entire identity. Then, 5 years ago, a scaffold gave out beneath him. The fall didn't just break his back. It broke the story he told himself about who he was. The surgeries saved his legs. They did not save his trade. 60 years old, and suddenly he wasn't the provider anymore. His body simply stopped agreeing with the man he'd always been. The disability checks were slow, small. The mortgage did not care about either of those facts. I remember the night my mother called me, her voice doing that bright, brittle thing it does right before it cracks. She kept repeating one word like saying it softer might change its meaning. Default. I was 29 then. Steady paycheck. No kids. No mortgage of my own to protect. So I sat at my kitchen table that night and did the math. Then I made a decision I never once announced out loud. I called the bank. I set up an automatic payment straight from my account, every single month, just enough to keep the house standing. I didn't call it a rescue. I didn't call it anything at all. When my mother asked how the bank had worked something out, I just said, it had. Which was true. In a way. I was the something. My father never asked how the house was saved. And maybe that should have told me everything right there. A man who has just lost the thing that made him feel like a man does not go looking for the person who quietly replaced it. He simply lets the relief wash over him, and calls it luck. I let him believe that. I told myself I was protecting his dignity. I didn't understand yet that I was building the very weapon he would one day use against me. 3 years ago, it happened again. My little sister, Piper, got into college. 17 years old, and for the first time in our family's history, someone had filled out an application without flinching. The acceptance letter came in spring. The tuition bill came right behind it, and it landed like a slammed door. There was no fund. There had never been a fund. My mother went quiet. My father left the room. So I called the bursar's office on my lunch break, standing in a hospital stairwell because it was the only place the signal worked. I set up another automatic payment. And I asked for one small thing. Send the receipts to my address. Not theirs. The woman on the phone said that was unusual. I told her my family likes surprises. What I actually wanted was a father who could brag to the neighbors about his daughter's scholarship, without a single dollar of his own behind it. He started telling people that. My mother repeated it at church, proud as anything. Piper believed it too, because why wouldn't she? 18-year-olds don't audit their own good fortune. They just say thank you to the sky and keep walking forward. I let her keep walking. I told myself the secret was a gift, that the truth would only make her feel like a burden, and she had spent enough of her childhood feeling exactly like that. I wanted her to have the light. So I stayed in the dark and paid for it. I believed, with my whole chest, that this was love in its purest form. Maybe part of it was. But a secret kindness has a strange habit of turning into a secret debt. And the person keeping the books quietly in the shadows is always the one who eventually gets called the thief. Then there was my brother, Coleman. 38 years old. The kind of man who walks into a room like someone just announced his arrival. Charming. A handshake for everyone. A plan for absolutely nothing that ever finished. He didn't lie, exactly. He just lived about 3 months ahead of whatever was actually in his bank account. That spring he came home with a new idea, the way he did every spring. This time it was a garage. His own repair shop. A real business, he said, both hands moving like he was already building it in the air. He needed seed money. Just a cushion. Just enough to sign the lease. He pitched it at Sunday dinner, and my father, glowing for the first time in months, turned to me and said the words that always followed one of Coleman's dreams. Help your brother out. Here is the part nobody at that table understood. The money my father was so generously offering didn't come from my father. It came from the same gap I'd been quietly filling for years. On top of the mortgage, I had also been feeding extra into my parents' household account every month, just to keep the lights on and the fridge full. That cushion Coleman needed? It only existed because I had put it there. When my father handed my brother a check, he was handing him my money, and feeling generous while he did it. I knew it. I'd known it for a while. And for the first time in 5 years, sitting there watching the gravy go cold, I didn't reach for my checkbook right away. I want to think about it, I said quietly. The table noticed the pause. My father's smile thinned at the edges, the way ice thins right before you hear the first crack. I told myself I was just being responsible. What I was actually doing was declining to disappear. And this family had never once forgiven anyone for that. A week later, I tried to do things the right way. I sat my parents down at their kitchen table and suggested we go through the finances together. All of it, out loud, no secrets left in the dark. My father waved a hand at me like I was offering to reorganize his garage. We've got it handled, he said. We always have. My mother nodded fast, the way she nods when she needs a sentence to be true more than she needs it to be honest. I left that house that day with the truth still folded up in my bag, and one sentence echoing behind me like a slammed door. We've got it handled. We always have. I would think about those words a month later, standing in a room full of relatives, watching them come apart in real time. I just didn't know yet how far my father would go to keep pretending they were true. The dinner that changed everything happened on an ordinary Thursday. Nothing marked on the calendar. Which, if you've ever lived through a night like this, is exactly how the worst ones tend to arrive. My mother had made the casserole she always makes when she wants the table to feel agreeable. Coleman was there, glowing again. Because his lease deadline was closing in and the cushion had run dry. He brought it up between bites, casual, certain. Like the money was simply a formality that had gotten delayed in the mail. He looked at me when he said it. They all did, eventually. The way you turn toward a faucet when you're thirsty. I set my fork down. I think we need to slow down, I said, using the same steady voice I use when a monitor starts screaming and panic would only make things worse. I'd like to actually look at the numbers before anyone signs anything. That was all I said. No accusation. No tally of everything I'd spent. Just a request to stop pretending the well had no bottom. But in that house, Asking to see the books was the same as calling everyone a liar. My mother's smile froze in place. Coleman leaned back, wounded, performing the hurt before he'd even decided he felt it. And my father went very still. In Walter Voss, silence is louder than shouting. He set his fork down to match mine. He looked at me across the candles my mother lights for no particular reason, and I watched something old and bitter rise up behind his eyes. I had spent 15 years making sure this man never had to feel small. He was about to make me pay for every single one of them. All you ever do, he said slowly, like he'd been saving the line for weeks, is take. You have never done a single thing for this family. The candles kept burning. My mother stared at her lap. Coleman found something fascinating at the bottom of his water glass. And Piper, home for the weekend, went pale and still, watching a storm she didn't understand yet. I want to tell you I had a speech ready. I didn't. 5 years of silent sacrifice, and not one word of defense came to me. Because some part of me had always known. This was exactly how the story would end. You can't argue with a verdict you've been quietly bracing for your whole life. My father wasn't finished. He leaned in, voice dropping to that flat, certain register men use when they're sure the whole room belongs to them. If you had any self-respect, he said, you'd leave. So leave. The cruelty of it wasn't even the words. It was how sure he was. In his version of events, he was the noble provider defending his table from an ungrateful daughter. And that belief was so complete, so airtight, that it left no room anywhere for the truth to squeeze in. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say his name, to say anything at all. She just kept folding her napkin into smaller and smaller squares. So I stood up. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I folded my own napkin and set it down beside my plate, the way you leave a room you actually intend to leave clean. Okay, Dad, I said. Quiet. Final. That's it. I thanked my mother for dinner. I picked up my coat. And I walked out into the dark. The screen door clapped shut behind me. I imagine, inside, there was a held breath, then relief, then the soft, easy return of conversation, like nothing important had just left the room. Outside, I sat in my car and didn't start the engine for a long minute. Then I drove home, and opened the closet. Because people love to say that walking away is the weak move. That night, I learned it can be the loudest thing you'll ever do, if you know exactly what you're walking away from. The drive home took 20 minutes. I remember almost none of it. Streetlights. The bridge over the river. My hands doing the driving while my head kept replaying the same 6 words on a loop. You have never done a single thing for this family. I wasn't angry yet. Anger needs room to breathe. And I was still too full of that table to feel anything but the echo of it. I let myself into my apartment. Stood in the dark with my coat still on, listening to how quiet a place gets when you live alone and nobody depends on you for the night. Then I thought about the payments. Every one of them. Still running. Still scheduled. Still drawing from my account like a heartbeat I'd forgotten I was even keeping alive. The mortgage. The tuition. The little cushion that had become my father's generosity. All of it under my name. Set up by me. Controlled by no one else on this earth. I want to be honest with you. I didn't decide anything in that exact moment. This isn't the version where I drove home already plotting revenge. That's not me, and it never has been. I just took off my coat, walked to my closet, and pulled out the folder I'd been quietly adding to for 5 years, without ever once laying it all out where I could actually see it. I told myself I only wanted to look, to remember, to hold proof of my own life in my hands after a man I loved had just told me it didn't exist. I sat down on my bedroom floor and opened the tab marked, in my own handwriting, with a single word. Family. And what spilled out wasn't a plan. It was a record. But records, I was about to learn, have a strange way of turning into verdicts of their own. I laid it all out in rows, because nurses chart things, and charting is simply how my mind works. 5 years of mortgage payments, every one stamped, cleared, dated. 3 years of tuition receipts from the bursar's office, my name sitting quietly in the pair line every single semester. A smaller stack for my mother's medical bills. And the little slips, the household cushion, The seed money that had become Coleman's dream and my father's pride. I added it all up. I'm good with numbers. It's half my job. And even I had to check the total twice. It was the kind of figure that buys a house outright in this town. I had spent it in pieces so small that no single payment ever felt like a sacrifice, which is exactly how you give away years of your life without ever noticing it's happening. Sitting there on the floor, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage. Not even sadness, really. Clarity. The cold, clean kind you get when a diagnosis finally explains every symptom you've been quietly writing off for years. I hadn't been taking from this family. I had been this family's quiet circulatory system. And they had mistaken the absence of visible pain for the absence of me. My father said I'd never done a single thing. The carpet said otherwise. In rows. In dates. In clear transactions that didn't care one bit about his pride or my silence. I gathered the papers back into their stacks, carefully, the way I handle anything that matters. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I only knew the lie finally had a shape. And once you've seen the real shape of something, you can't unsee it. You can only decide whether you're going to keep holding it up. Let me be clear about what I decided, because it would be easy to call it revenge. Revenge was never the word in my head. Revenge is loud. Revenge wants an audience and a confession. What I felt that night was simpler and colder than that. I had just been told, plainly, by the head of my family, that I took and never gave. Fine. I would stop giving the things only I had ever been giving. Not to punish anyone, but to finally test the words in the only way words like that can ever really be tested. If I truly had never done anything for this family, then nothing would change when I stopped. The mortgage would keep getting paid by whoever had secretly been handling it. The tuition would keep clearing on its mysterious scholarship. Coleman's cushion would simply refill itself from wherever cushions apparently come from. My father said they had it handled. They always had. So I would let them handle it. I wouldn't announce a thing. No bitter text messages. No dramatic scene. I would simply remove my hand from the wall and let the family discover, on the ordinary schedule of due dates and late notices, exactly how much of the structure had always been me. It was the most honest thing I could think to do. It was also, I knew even then, the most devastating. Because a truth that arrives slowly is so much heavier than a truth that gets shouted. I opened my banking app, found the recurring payments, the ones I had set up alone, in my name, requiring no signature but my own to end. My thumb hovered over the first one. The mortgage. I thought about my mother. I almost stopped. Then I thought about her napkin, folded into smaller and smaller squares while her husband threw me out of my own childhood home. And I didn't stop. I didn't cancel everything in one blind sweep, though. That's not how I do anything. I went down the list the way I'd chart a med pass, deliberate, double-checked, no errors. Mortgage assistance, off. Household cushion, off. My mother's medical auto-pay, off, though that one cost me a breath I didn't expect to lose. And the tuition I handled differently. Because there was one person in this entire story who had done nothing wrong except believe a kind lie. And I would not let her absorb a hit that was never meant for her. Before I turned anything off, I called the bursar's office the next morning. Same stairwell. Same stubborn signal. I asked for the exact drop deadline, the date after which an unpaid balance would pull a student out of her classes. I made sure the current semester was already fully paid, fully safe, before I touched the payment for the next one. Piper would finish her term. She would not lose a single class in the fall. What she would lose, eventually, was the illusion. And that debt belonged to the adults in her life. Not to me. I set it all in motion in under an hour, sitting at my kitchen table still in my scrubs, coffee going cold beside me. When it was done, I felt the strangest thing. Lightness. Not joy. Nothing so clean as joy. Just the specific relief of setting down a weight you've carried for so long, you'd forgotten you still had arms underneath it. Somewhere across town, a clock nobody could see had just started counting down toward a stack of envelopes. I slept better that night than I had in 5 years. For 2 full weeks, nothing happened. The payments I'd stopped wouldn't come due until the billing cycle turned, so the family carried on exactly as before. standing on air, and calling it ground. My mother texted me 4 days in. Not an apology. A casserole of a sentence. You know how your father gets. Come for Sunday dinner. We'll forget all about it. Forget all about it. As if being told to leave your own family's table was a spilled drink, and not a door slamming shut. I read it twice and set the phone face down. When I finally answered, I kept it warm and brief, the way you'd answer a coworker you no longer fully trust. I said I needed some time. I asked how she was feeling. I said nothing about money, because at that point, nobody yet had a reason to bring it up. That was the eeriest part of those 2 weeks. The silence wasn't peace. It was a fuse, already lit, burning quietly down inside the walls where nobody could yet see the smoke. Coleman posted a photo of an empty garage bay. Coming soon, tagged like a man who believed his cushion was permanent. Piper sent me a meme about midterms, and I sent back a heart, because she hadn't done anything wrong and didn't deserve my distance. My father said nothing at all, which, from him, was its own kind of message. He'd drawn his line in the sand, and he fully expected me to crawl back over it, apologetic, the way I always had before. He had no idea the ground beneath him had already been quietly sold out from under his feet. He was about to find that out the way this whole family was about to find out everything. On paper. In the mail. Right on schedule. There was one envelope in the folder I hadn't opened in 2 years. It sat at the very back, behind all the receipts, the paper gone soft as cloth. My grandmother's handwriting was on the front. Just my name. The old nickname only she ever used for me. Grandma June was my father's mother, and she was the one person in this family who had ever looked at me and seemed to see the entire picture. She passed away 2 springs ago, her mind sharp right up until the last week. She left me this letter through her lawyer, along with a small inheritance that I had, of course, quietly folded straight back into the family. I'd read the letter once, at the funeral, and put it away, because grief made the words too heavy to hold that day. That night, sitting on my bedroom floor with everything else laid bare around me, I finally opened it again. Her handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but the voice on the page was entirely, unmistakably hers. She wrote that she knew. She'd always known what I was quietly doing for that house, even when nobody said it out loud, because she had done the very same thing for her own family, once, a long time ago. And she recognized the particular kind of tiredness it puts behind a person's eyes. Then she wrote the line I would carry with me into every room for the rest of this story. Take care of them if you can, sweetheart. But don't you ever let this family make you small, just so they can feel big. Love isn't proof that you owe them everything. I read it 4 times. I pressed my thumb against the ink, as if I could somehow feel her through it. For 5 years, I had believed that disappearing into my family's needs was the highest form of love a person could offer. My grandmother, who had spent a lifetime learning the true cost of that exact belief, was telling me, from beyond the grave, that I'd had it backwards the whole time. I folded the letter and put it in my purse. I would not be leaving it behind again. My father's 65th birthday was coming up at the end of the month, and my brother, sensing an opportunity to rewrite the family story before the numbers could finish speaking, decided it needed to be an event. Not a quiet dinner. A full celebration. Every relative. A rented back room at the nicest restaurant in town. A slideshow. A toast. A chance, he told me on the phone, to show everybody the family's doing just fine. He said it to me like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't been told to leave my own father's table only 2 weeks earlier. Because in Coleman's mind, the fight was already over. And in his version, I'd already lost. The deposit was down. The menu was chosen. He'd figure out the rest, which in Coleman speak has always meant someone else will. I listened. I said almost nothing. He was building a stage, a big, well-lit, public stage, in front of every relative whose opinion my father had spent his whole life carefully managing. And he was building it entirely on credit that traced straight back to a cushion that no longer existed. I didn't tell him that. I just asked for the date, and I wrote it down. Because here's the thing about a man who throws a party specifically to prove his family is fine. He has absolutely no idea he's just scheduled the exact moment the truth is going to walk through the front door. By the time the week was out, The bills had started arriving. Not all at once. Close enough, though, to feel like an avalanche to people who had never once seen the snow building above them. The mortgage company sent a past due notice, then a second one stamped in red, then a phone call my mother let ring 3 times before she finally answered. The bursar's office sent Piper's spring balance, along with a polite, unmissable warning about enrollment status. And the medical billing office began its own slow drumbeat of statements, addressed to a household that suddenly had no idea why bills it had never seen before were now piling up on the kitchen counter. For the first time in 5 years, my parents were finally looking at the real shape of the life they'd been living. I heard about most of it secondhand. My aunt mentioned it on the phone, worried, fishing gently. "Your folks doing okay over there? Your mother seemed pretty shaken at church." I said I wasn't sure, which was technically true. I no longer knew the inside of that house. I only knew what I had stopped feeding into it. And I could picture the rest well enough. Confusion first, then blame, searching for a door to walk through. I already knew exactly which door it would choose. It always chose the same one. Me. My mother finally called on a Wednesday night. Not my father. Calling would have meant admitting he needed something. And a man like Walter Voss would sooner sink quietly than send up a flare. So it was my mother, her voice doing the bright, breakable thing again, only thinner now. Stretched tight over something close to real panic. "Maren, honey, I think the bank made a mistake." I closed my eyes and let her talk. The mortgage company kept calling. Piper's school had sent something strange about her account. There were doctor's bills she didn't understand. "I think someone stole our information," she said. It would have been so easy to be cruel in that moment. To hand the word scholarship right back to her and watch it land. I didn't. "I'm sorry you're dealing with all that," I said, using the same level voice I use on the floor at 3 in the morning. "I don't know anything about a scholarship." And that was true. There had never been one. I wasn't lying to her. I was simply, for the first time in years, declining to lie for her. She went quiet. I could hear her doing math she'd spent 5 years avoiding, the slow, sinking arithmetic of a woman starting to suspect that the mystery holding her family together had a name, a face, and had been sitting at her table just weeks ago, being told it had never given her family a single thing. "Maren," she said, "careful now. Did you? Were you the one who?" I didn't answer. Not on the phone. Not where it could be quietly denied, or twisted, or buried under you know how your father gets. Some truths only survive if they're delivered in person, on paper, in front of witnesses. "I'll see you at the party," I said gently. "We can talk then." And I hung up before she could ask again. Piper found out before the party could deliver it to her properly. I had hoped to control how she learned the truth. A billing office doesn't much care about your timing. She logged into her own student account for the very first time. The one she'd never had a reason to open before, and the full payment history was sitting right there. No scholarship. No grant. Every single semester marked paid in full by a recurring outside payment. When she called the bursar's office to make sense of it, the tired woman on the other end simply confirmed what Piper was already staring at. Pair of record, Maren Voss. Recurring payment, discontinued, effective the spring term. She called me that night, and I knew the second I heard her breathe. "It was you," she said. "The whole time, it was you." And Dad said. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. We both already knew exactly what he'd said. "You have never done a single thing for this family." She started to cry. The deep kind. Half shame, half grief. "Piper, listen to me," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were a kid. You believed your parents. That's not a crime." "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. And there it was. The one question I had been dodging for 3 straight years, finally asked by the one person who actually deserved a real answer. I gave her the only one I had. "Because I loved you. And I thought love had to stay invisible to count." "I was wrong about that," I added, quieter. "Grandma told me so." They moved the party from the restaurant back to the house after all, which somehow made it both worse and better. Worse, because the living room I grew up in was now packed wall to wall with relatives, and there is no neutral ground in a room that once watched you learn how to walk. Better. Because home is exactly where truth has the least room left to hide. I brought a folder. Not for a speech. I still had no intention of making one. The bills had already been doing their quiet work for weeks, and letting the truth arrive on its own schedule had always been the plan. But my father and brother had made a different choice. They had decided to put me on trial in front of every relative they could fit into that room. And I was not walking into an ambush with empty hands. Inside the folder, 5 years of mortgage statements, my name in every account line. 3 years of tuition receipts, the pair field impossible to misread. My mother's medical billing records. And one summary page I made myself, because I'm a nurse, and nurses put the vitals at the top of the chart. Numbers don't raise their voice. That's exactly why I trusted them to speak for me. Behind all of it, tucked quietly at the back, I kept my grandmother's letter. Not to read out loud. Just to hold close, in a room where I needed to remember whose granddaughter I actually was. It started, of course, with a toast. Coleman tapped his glass, gathered the room, thanked everyone for coming, talked about family, about sticking together through a rough month. Then he turned the knife exactly the way he'd clearly rehearsed it, smiling, his eyes finding me at the edge of the room. Some people, he said, think family is something you can just walk away from, the second the bills get hard. A few heads turned. My father sat up straighter in his recliner, color rising, ready. We've had a rough stretch, Coleman continued, because somebody decided to teach us all a lesson. To cut us off. To punish 2 people who gave her everything. He gestured toward me, gentle and damning, the prosecutor resting his case. My father took it from there, because he couldn't help himself. Because the rage had been waiting weeks for a room this size. She abandoned us, he said, pushing up out of his recliner, pointing across the heads of his own relatives. Her own parents. Cut off her own family and left us drowning. And for what? Because I hurt her feelings at dinner. He looked around for agreement, and found only the soft, uncertain quiet of people who didn't yet have all the facts. All she ever did, he said, slower now, savoring it, was take. And the one time we needed her, she proved it. The room held its breath. Piper's hand found mine and gripped it. And I stood up. I want you to notice what I did next, because it's the part that actually mattered. I stood up in my father's living room, 30 relatives watching, and I spoke at the exact volume you'd use to tell someone their coffee is ready. You're right that I stopped paying, I said. I want to be very clear about that. I did stop. My father's chin lifted. Vindicated. The room leaning his way. Then I bent down, opened my bag, and pulled out the folder. I just think everyone should know exactly what it was I stopped paying. I didn't throw the papers. I didn't wave them around. I walked to the folding table beside the birthday cake, and I set them down, one at a time, like dealing cards, naming each as it landed. This is the mortgage on this house. 5 years. Every month. From my account. This is my sister's tuition. 3 years, every semester. There was never a scholarship. It was me. These are my mother's medical bills. And this is the seed money that became Coleman's garage, and Dad's pride. That was mine too. A sound moved through the room. Low. 30 people, all recalculating at once. I set the summary page down last. The one with the total at the top. You said you always had it handled, I said quietly. These are the payments that handled it. Every single one, under my name. I let that sit for a second. So yes. I stopped. Because a month ago, at that table, you told me I had never done a single thing for this family. My aunt picked up the tuition statement with a shaking hand. The papers began moving now, passing person to person around the room, and with every pair of eyes that dropped to those numbers, my father's face lost another piece of its certainty. For the first time in my entire life, he looked afraid. My mother broke before he did. She'd been standing near the kitchen doorway holding a tray of something she'd already forgotten. She set it down very carefully, like it might shatter, like she might. And then she started to cry. Not the bright, performed kind I'd known my whole life. Something raw. Something that had been held under the surface for 18 years. I'm sorry, she said. Not to the room. To me. Maren, I'm so sorry. The relatives went quiet around her. We should have told her the truth a long time ago, she said, the words tumbling out now, unstoppable. When she was 16, we had her college fund. And Coleman got into real trouble. Money he owed people you don't want to owe. We used her fund to make it disappear. All of it. And we never paid her back. We never could. A murmur moved through the room. Coleman stared at the floor. Every year, she did more for this family, my mother went on. It just reminded us of what we'd already taken from her. So I told myself it was small. I called it little favors. Because if it was little, then what we did to her felt small too. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. It wasn't little. None of it was little. She rebuilt the very thing we stole from her. And we let her father call her a thief. It was the most honest thing my mother had ever said in front of another living soul. And it cost her everything to say it. My father did exactly what I knew he would. He exploded. It was the only move left to a man whose entire identity had just been laid face up on a folding table beside a sheet cake. You did this to humiliate me, he roared, coming up out of the recliner. In my own house. On my own birthday. His face was red. His hands were shaking. And the louder he got, the smaller he looked, because the room had already seen the proof, and his volume couldn't bury it anymore. I did not match him. That's the whole inversion of this story. That's the part I promised myself in the car weeks earlier. I stayed quiet, and let the contrast do all the work that shouting never could. When he finally ran out of breath, glaring at me across a room full of stunned relatives, I answered him at the exact same volume I'd started with. No, Dad, I said. I didn't do this to humiliate you. I did the opposite for 5 years. I paid so you'd never have to feel humiliated. Every neighbor who thought you were doing just fine. You were doing fine because of me. You just never knew it was me. The silence after that was the loudest thing in the entire house. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A month ago, I continued, you told me if I had any self-respect, I'd leave. So I did. Quietly. No scene. Exactly what you asked. The only thing I took with me was my own name. Off of payments I set up myself. The bills, Dad. The bills are just the sound of you finding out what I was actually carrying, the whole time I was walking out that door. I reached into my bag one more time. Not for evidence. For my grandmother's letter. I didn't read it out loud. Some things aren't meant for a crowd. Grandma June knew, I said instead, and watched my father flinch at his own mother's name. She knew exactly what I was doing for this family, and before she died, she left me a letter about it. She told me to take care of you all, if I could. But she also told me never to let this family make me small, just so the rest of you could feel big. I looked around the room. My weeping mother. My silent brother. My sister's hand, still tight in mine. I'm done being small, I said. That's all tonight ever was. Not revenge. Just me, finally standing up straight. I put the letter back in my bag. For the first time in my entire life, my father had absolutely nothing left to say. It wasn't dramatic after that. Nobody shouted him down. Nobody threw a drink. It was quieter than that, and far more final. It was my aunt quietly moving to stand beside me instead of him. It was the cousins who'd been nodding along to all she ever did was take, unable to meet his eyes anymore. It was a neighbor setting down the tuition statement and murmuring, to no one in particular, "My God, Ray, she saved this house." The story my father had spent a month carefully building collapsed in about 10 minutes. Not because I shouted it down. Because I set the truth on a table and let the room read it for themselves. My mother crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Piper and me both, and the three of us stood there while the party slowly, awkwardly, reassembled itself around us into something else entirely. My father lowered himself back into his recliner, looking older than he had an hour earlier. Looking, for the first time in his life, like a man who had finally run out of story. I didn't gloat. There was nothing to gloat about. I hadn't won a war. I had simply stopped losing a quiet one I'd been losing my entire life. Here's what happened after. Because I know you want to know. I didn't cut my family off completely. That was never the point. Cutting them off would have just been another way of letting my father's words define me. The taker, finally taking everything away for good. Instead, I did something harder. I put everything in the light. I kept paying Piper's tuition, but directly to her, out loud, with her knowing every single dollar. She took a part-time job at the campus library anyway, not because I asked, but because she wanted her own skin in the game. And I let her, because that's what dignity looks like when it's still young and learning its own shape. I didn't simply resume the mortgage payments either. I sat my parents down, just the two of them, no audience, and laid out real terms, like the professional I am. The payment would move fully into their name, alongside a financial counselor we'd meet with together. Whatever help I gave from that point on would be a choice I made each month as a free woman, not a debt I paid as a hostage. My father didn't argue. He signed where the counselor pointed. Quiet, humbled in a way I had never once seen from him. And once, only once, he looked up at me and said, "Thank you, Maren." Cracked. Rough. Real. It wasn't an apology. I didn't pretend that it was. But it was the first time in 15 years he had acknowledged, out loud, that I had ever given this family anything at all. I decided to let that be enough. For now. My brother moved out by spring. No garage. No empire. Just a regular job an hour away. And a lot less to say at family dinners. We're cordial. That's all, and honestly, that's fine. My mother and I are slowly finding our way back to each other. Two women who spent far too long folding themselves into smaller and smaller squares. Learning, a little late, but not too late, how to take up space again. My grandmother's letter lives on my nightstand now. Not the back of a closet where I have to go digging for it. Close enough to reach, on the nights the old smallness tries to creep back in. I still work the ICU. I still keep my voice steady while everything around me falls apart. But I don't disappear into other people's needs anymore. I help when I choose to. And I let it be seen. That, it turns out, was the whole lesson this expensive decade of my life was trying to teach me. Love doesn't have to be loud to be real. But it should never, ever cost you the right to be seen. If someone has ever made you feel like you gave nothing, while you were quietly giving everything, you don't have to shout to set the record straight. You just have to stop holding up a wall that was never yours to carry alone, and let them finally see what you were carrying the whole time. By the way, where are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments, because it's honestly amazing to see how far these stories travel around the world. If this one reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you believe in quiet people who finally stop carrying everyone else, subscribe. There's more where this came from.